Morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Shop Talk. Today, we're continuing our discussion with Tony Roberts, the current author of Casca the Eternal Mercenary, originally written by Barry Sadler. Tony Roberts is continuing the series. So if you're interested in any of his titles, check out casca.net. And you can actually buy the Barry Sadler reprints. So today is a little bit, I guess you could say, controversial. Not so much, but this topic has been covered by Paperback Warrior podcast. I'll provide the link below to that. The allegations of plagiarism within the series. So you can listen to that and also watch this episode of Shop Talk, and you can formulate your own opinion on it. We still get plenty of messages asking questions about it. We don't want to dive too much into it. I guess you could say it's a black eye on the series at that time. But like I said, it was just a very bad time frame for the Casca series. But stay tuned. If you like what you see and hear, hit the like and subscribe. More's to come for Shop Talk. Appreciate it.
On the top.
Yeah, now you're wearing the Eagle badge.
I'm wearing the Eagle badge.
Mexico.
Me,
right. I decided just to go with free hugs.
All right, free hugs. Yeah, yeah, very nice.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I want to have free hugs with that character. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't know. Somebody said it was Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Influence. It's kind
that sounds like a death metal band.
it does, but I think it was a B-rated movie, and
it sounds like like Plan 9 from Outer Space or Attack of the Killer Tomatoes or something like that.
Right.
Which is George Clooney, wasn't it? Attack of the Killer Tomatoes was a George Clooney film.
I think you're right.
He was in that. He was in that.
Yeah.
Very early on.
Yeah, that's when he got his start. That was in his that was a horrible movie.
Yeah, I don't think he wants to put it on his CV though.
No, I don't think he's out promoting it. But I think we left off where you had taken up with
it was
Gail Ryan,
right on that's right. The dawn of me.
Halls of Montezuma, Johnny Red, the Confederate, and those are considered a trilogy.
They are. The original intention from Gail was to do one story about the American Civil War, and very quickly I came to the conclusion that would be impossible unless you wanted something like Tolstoy's War and Peace, which, it's pulp fiction. It's meant to be an easy read. You take it onto an aircraft and read it, or on a train or a bus or whatever. You read it and it's over by the time the journey finishes. So you don't want a book which is sort of like 900 pages long, like Frank Herbert's Dune or whatever it was. So I said to Gail, no, it's going to have to be 2 stories, maybe 3, especially with the Halls of Montezuma. I had in mind, right from the word go, the end scene of Casca going off into the sunset, very cliched, but I thought that would be a good way of ending the stories. Halls of Montezuma would be a kind of a first of the trilogy, but a sort of a prequel to the American Civil War, because so many of the American generals on both sides of that conflict fought in the Mexican War. And also I wanted to hold the 3 books together. My thoughts were, well, how can I do that? What would keep Casca there for all those years? Because the Mexican War began in about 1847, wasn't it, or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the American Civil War was 1861 to 1865. So there's quite a bit of a gap. So what would keep Casca there? And I sort of hit upon the idea of him befriending a family of immigrants from Ireland, and going to the farm that they were staying in and helping them settle down, really. So it would be a widow and 3 kids. And the 3 kids will obviously grow up. And I wanted the kids to be, quite central to the stories. So there was 2 girls and a boy, and the boy would naturally join the Confederate Army with Casca when the Civil War came. But with the Mexican War, Casca would obviously go off to fight that without them and leave them there. And there are a couple of other unsavory characters going around, and of course the Brotherhood of the Lamb. They featured quite strongly in these stories, which again I felt helped link the stories together. I know some people who read these books don't like the Brotherhood of the Lamb. They don't like them being in there. And yet other fans love them. They want them to be in every story. So as the author, I hear both sides, and I think, right, I've got to try and steer a middle ground here. So there are some stories that will have the Brotherhood in and some that won't. So I'm hoping to try and sort of like cater to both sides, but not go too overboard one way or the other.
Yeah, it's a delicate balancing act.
It is, yeah.
Because that's one thing I've noticed is you do listen to the fans on what they would like to see.
Of course.
So and that's been kind of like your motto for as long as you've been at the helm.
Even some of the less savory criticisms, I'm trying to sort of look behind the reasons why they would come like that, and I'm thinking, was it possible for me to sort of correct in some measure what they're griping at? Yes, if it's impossible, or if they're just saying, this is an abortion mixed with mayo, that is what one person actually wrote about one of my early books. I have no idea why, what he's talking about, and what aspect he doesn't like. Please be specific.
Right.
1 or 2 people said I lack the focus from Casca's point of view, and I thought, okay, I'll take that on board. The first 3 books, I admit myself, weren't my best, but as I sort of went on, I did sort of like take up on board some of the things that people have said about the writing and try to sort of incorporate them as best I can in the stories. But yes, I do listen.
Yeah, well, if it's positive criticism, then you can incorporate it. But when it's negative or it's
self-defeating if it's negative, it's like name calling. You just
right, So there's that balancing act too, because sometimes and this is what I've noticed, you'll get a bad review, but if it's like constructive, it can be a positive thing. So, but you wrote the three books, and then you wrote Avenger, and that one takes place after, I can't remember. We just talked about it too.
Yeah, I mean, going a bit back on the trilogy. I mean, I had to sort of find my way really there, because I didn't start from a running position. I started from a standing position. And Gale, who was sort of financing it, he didn't have an awful lot of money, so he was quite strapped for cash, and he was hoping that the Casca series would actually be successful, be lucrative. Unfortunately, the 10-year gap between Barry's death and Paul taking it up, and then the 3 to 4 years that Paul was involved, it slowed the series down to a stop. So we had to start all over again. And also because bookshops weren't stocking it, and we didn't have a big distributor or a publishing company to help promote it, we were starting really right again, but without the Barry Sadler, fame. There were people out there who wanted to read the books, but it was the trick was to get back in contact with them. And, you know, Gale putting it out on Amazon was one way, but he thought that that would be enough, and it wasn't. And I said to him, you know, we've got to advertise it, but advertising costs money. And actually, I did advertise it out of my own money on one of the magazines, and it you know, had quite a circulation. And I think I had 2 sales. It just shows you, you know, you've got to really keep hammering away and spending a lot of money. And it's money that we don't have, or we never have had, and at the moment we still haven't got. But the other problem I had with Halls of Montezuma in particular was Russ Atkinson, the editor that Gale hired. Russ, as I said before, was to have his name on the book and not mine. And I objected to it, and I actually refused to write until Gale had changed my contract to state that I did have my name on the book, and that was actually written to my contract, you know, so he couldn't go against that. And then we started going, but Russ got in the way. He slowed things down. He delayed things because he just couldn't keep deadlines. And I'm going to say this because it's the truth. And in the end, Gale got quite cross and rushed it through. And the thing with the Halls of Montezuma, if people actually read it, if you read the first chapter, it's written in a different style to my writing. And the reason behind that was that Russ got hold of the first chapter and was rewriting it as editor. And he got halfway through it, and then Gale just said, look, we want the September deadline for the Christmas period. So it had to be sort of like rushed through. You know, Russ was sort of like cut off, and that's why the first chapter doesn't seem to fit quite right with the rest of the story. So we got it out, and then I started writing Johnny Reb, and again, Russ was asked to be the editor. And this time what they wanted me to do was to write 1 chapter, send it off to Russ for him to look over it, edit it, send it back to me, and then I would do chapter 2. And I just said, this is going to take years to do at the rate which, I said to Gale, get rid of him or I'm not writing it. So in the end, Gale had to fire Russ, you know, and then I can get going. So that was the first problem I had with being the author of the book.
Right. And then, yeah, and well, let's see, who took over after that? That was James, right?
Yeah, James was sort of a proofreader stroke editor, but he was more laid back, and he wouldn't get it until the story was finished.
And for people who don't know, we're talking about James Nollett, who was one of the editors for the Casca series.
Yes, he now lives in Poland, and I still keep in contact with him. And I think you do, don't you, occasionally?
Oh yeah, occasionally.
Yeah.
He's
and so yeah, James was on the project, and Gale was still doing the illustrations for the book covers. And you know, we had the blog at the time, and there was a storm of protest over the quality of the covers. And Gale had to then admit that we had to find somebody to do the illustrations. And that was when I brought in a friend of mine who I worked with, Damien Lee, to do the cover of Avenger, which was more in the style of the old books, because that's what I wanted to go towards. So this is the Avenger, and you can see the sort of style of the drawings, because with Casca, you have to have the main character front face plus cameos of scenes from the story, so you've got an idea of what it's about. So yeah, you've got horse racing, you've got slave girls, you've got the Brotherhood of the Lamb featured there. So again, the 4th book in a row that I had the Brotherhood of the Lamb in. And by this time, even I was getting fed up with writing them in. So you know, I was sort of looking to not include them in the next book that I was going to write. But then suddenly Gale told me that there was somebody else going to come in and write the books at the same time as myself, which I sort of was quite surprised with. Right.
And you could see a problem because you were worried about the timeline interference possibility.
And I don't like it when more than one writer writes in a series. You know, a series always suffers because of that. You know, you've got to look at the Outlander and the what's the other series?
Deadlands.
Jeff Lands, that's right. They had a whole array of writers writing it under the name of James Axler, isn't it? Yeah. James Axler doesn't exist. That's a pseudonym for the farmed number of writers.
It's a publishing house name.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I didn't want that happening to Cassie, because two writers will be writing differently. You'd have different styles, and as you say, the timeline could be violated, and you could actually be writing about the same time period at the same time. And I always think it's best that one writer just does it. I know Gail wanted more books a year, to try and maximize income. But I think it was a counterproductive thing, and the problems that arose when the other writer came in, just confirmed what I was worried about. Right.
Yeah. I remember during that particular time, there was a lot of some people were confused, and I think it just did confuse people. It really did totally confuse people. Yeah, and then you had people that it basically separated people.
It split the series up. You have some people gravitating to the other writer, some people gravitating to myself, some people getting really fed up with the two groups of fans arguing amongst each other, and
you lost those fans.
Yeah, we lost it. So we were actually shooting ourselves in the foot. And I was trying to tell Gail, but he wouldn't listen. It really annoyed me. I mean, I could see where things could go, and Gail was just too intent on making money.
Right. Well, I believe he was trying to make money, but he was also trying to push the series back to the same heightened status that was prevalent when Barry Sadler was writing it. That's just my opinion.
But the problem we had was that the other writer and myself, we're not Barry Sadler.
Right.
Barry's gone.
Right.
Sad to say, but so we didn't have that fame attached to us. I was a Brit, and I know some people don't like it because of Brits writing the Casca series.
Right.
I've had that, racist attacks. And the other writer, obviously, he was brand new, and he had that sort of problem to contend with as well. So we weren't well-known names, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So you had that extra problem, no publicity, just eBay and Amazon and my website, and that was it.
And word of mouth, basically.
Word of mouth.
Yeah, and even today, I still run into people. They know the Casca series as Barry Sadler wrote it, right?
Yes.
But they don't know that the Casca series is still going on. They're kind of surprised. They're like, "Oh, really? I didn't know this." So
we are trying to promote it, on social media, but it takes such a huge amount of effort. It does take money. I mean, you can't escape it. You've got to get hold of some publishing people to publish it, and it costs so much money these days to publish.
It does. Yeah. And this is the problem that I see time and time again with indie authors who write a book. They pay an editor to go through it. They pay out gobs of money for marketing. They put it up on Amazon. Their launch is perfect, and they're actually making sales and everything, but the book ranking is still in the toilet. So marketing.
I don't like Amazon. I think that they just deliberately skew it in favor of the big boys, and they stamp on the small boys. I don't care what anybody says. They do. They stamp down on the small people.
Yeah,
they want where the big money is.
Yeah, well, they know which side the bread is buttered.
Yes,
so to speak. But I've seen that happen, and it's a common complaint.
Yes, but they don't want to listen.
No, they're not going to listen. But I noticed a lot of other authors are actually taking matters in their own hands, and they're trying different alternative routes, you know, to avoid it.
Well, you have to. You've got to remember, Amazon is a buyer's website. It's not a seller's website. They don't do any favors for sellers whatsoever. You know, I can't sell paperbacks on Amazon because I make a loss. I physically make a loss because there are 4 sets of fees that they take from a sale. And I have to pay out for the printing costs. You know, I have to pay out for the ISBNs, the International Book Serial Numbers. I have to pay out for the artwork, you know, out of my own pocket. Then I have to sell. And of course, you know, the number of sales I have is nice. It's increasing every year, but it's still not massive. I'm not J.K. Rowling, for Christ's sake. Yeah. And if I sort of like put a book on Amazon and it sells, I make a loss because they only cover the postage up to a certain amount. The postage cost in the United States, you know, it's beginning at, well, £5 for the very small books, but the usual is £8.30. And, you know, that's enormous. And Amazon give you £4, £5. Well, you know, you've lost £3 straight away. And then there's 4 extra fees that they leech out of you. And all of a sudden I'm losing, you know, a pound a sale. I can't afford to do that. So I took my paperbacks off Amazon. It's no way could I carry on doing that.
Right. Yeah. Financially, it's a loss, you know. So,
yeah.
You know, hopefully Amazon one day gets that mess straightened out. But
I doubt it.
I kind of doubt it. At least
they look after the big boys. They look after the big boys. So what happened was that book number 29 was published, which is that one.
Right.
The artwork was done by someone called Greg Brantley, who he came in on the Casca project early stage. He was sort of in contact with Gail. Greg's from Texas. Gail was in Tennessee. And Greg was another Casca fan, very enthusiastic man. And he got in early with the artwork scene and spoke to Gail a lot. And Gail agreed to let him do the artwork for that book, which he did. In fact, what happened was that I was getting my own artwork person to do the artwork for my books. And Greg was getting the books done for the other author. And when I brought out my next book, which was Napoleon's Soldier, that one, again, the artwork was done by Damien. Gail then flatly refused to allow me to use Damien again. And he said it's all got to go with Greg. So, you know, I had to sort of, you know, bow to Gail's, you know, edict, because Gail was the man with the money and running the series, and I was only working for him. I wasn't very happy, but, you know, there you go. So, you know, Greg then became the artwork man for the Casca series at that time. So, you know, once Immortal Dragon, the book by the other author was written, you know, that was a sort of set in modern day. You know, at the time it was about 2008, I think it was published. So it was set then, and it was very action orientated, and you know, parts of the book I found were all right, but the rest of it I was sort of like, oh, it's just too much. My eyes started bleeding with all the action. I was more going for storyline of people, and this one, Napoleon's Soldier, was about the French invasion of Russia in 1812. As we all know, the Grand Army came a cropper, didn't it? And memory serves, there was an earlier book in the Barry Sadler period that referred to Casca being in the Grand Army of 1812. Yeah. So that was another thing that I was doing. Once the arguments over following the time period through for what Gail wanted, you know, from Horse of Montezuma all the way through to the Prohibition period sequentially, that was kicked out. That was another argument I had with Gail. I told him that the buyers, the fans, would not want that. They wanted stuff in the Middle Ages, you know, all over the place, time period wise, you know, different things. Gail wouldn't have it. And I said, all right, I'll put it up on the blog. So I did. I said, what would you like to see? And I gave everybody the chance, and it was overwhelming in favor of scattered stuff, swords, guns. So Gail again had to concede that, I've been right. And so The Avenger came out, which was set straight after the events of Sentinel. So that sort of extended the sort of life of Casca in his continuous story from the word go. But then I sort of jumped to a gun period story, and I was sort of looking at previous Barry Sadler era books and what did they refer to? That would be a good story. So I was using that as a kind of a sort of a springboard to write stories. And I thought Napoleon was quite a good subject to write, and the disaster of the French army in Russia, where 500,000 men went out and about 1,000 got back. That was, quite a good story. So I wrote that one. And it was one of the stories that I encompassed my own love of suspense and a traitor in the background, because I used to read Alistair MacLean when I was much younger. I was sort of like 9, 10, 11 going up. And I always loved his stories where he had a traitor in the ranks bumping people off one by one, So I did that. One of the group of soldiers that Casca was with was somebody who had committed an awful crime and was holding some icons. And Casca had a clue as to who it was, but he didn't know what the clue meant until the very end of the book. And then he realized who it was and turned on it. And that was, I felt was sort of like a nice sort of ending to the story kind of thing, And
that was a good story. That was a good one.
It's the retreat through the snow, wasn't it? I mean,
yes.
I had a book that I bought to read for research by a Polish author, and it was a fantastic book. And a lot of the little incidents that appeared in that book did actually occur in real life. All the unit that he was in was real. The colonel was a real man, and the bit where they unscrewed the eagle from the pole and put it in this guy's coat, that really happened. That was described as what happened in that book. And so yeah, I had an antagonist, the Cossack, who was a really nasty piece of work. It was determined on getting Casca and killing him, and that was an extra spice to the story. I like to put different layers to it, so rather than just a straightforward, oh, we're going to Russia, oh, we're going back. I had the girl Marianka in there. I had this Cossack. I had the traitor. When's it all going to resolve itself?
Right.
I felt it's quite a good story, much even though I say so myself. The only moan I got on Amazon was somebody saying that Napoleon should have met Casca and he should have been the elder of the Brotherhood of the Lamb. I thought, I've been fed up with writing about them, so I was giving him a rest.
Right. Yeah, that was the one time you were like, well, it's okay to bring up the Brotherhood every once in a while, but not in every book.
No.
It kind of defeats the purpose of mystery, and that's just my personal opinion. But so we know, and this is one of the touchy subjects, and it kind of gave the series a little bit of a black eye. Okay.
Yeah, there were a lot of things going on in the background. Yeah, it went on in the background. I didn't like what was going on. I had to keep quiet by and large, because you know what it's like when you're an author and you're writing a series and people have a go at you. You can't ever go back at them because you're damned, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah. Not only that, but you're hurting what you're trying to do, and you're also hurting book sales. You're hurting. I mean, it's. I remember during that time, you were with all the in-house fighting that was going on. I remember distinctly you were telling people, look, this isn't helping the series. This isn't a good thing. It
actually made me quite ill. I actually had quite a lot of mental illness over this. I really was hugely depressed and very sick. And I struggled on writing the next couple of books.
Yeah. And it was, yeah, it was. Distinctly remember, just all the in-house fighting, and I'm just like watching on the forum, everybody just kind of attacking each other. You had the pro Roberts, and then you had the other Casca writer, pro that guy, and then what made it even more disheartening was the other team, so to speak, was leaving bad reviews on Amazon or anywhere else that they could against your books. And
yeah,
I was like, I don't understand any of this,
Well,
to me, it was just
trying to think of the reasons why. I just had the impression that they were trying to have me fired and replaced with the other writer. That's how I saw it. And the only person that I actually spoke to about it was Gale, and I was pleading with him to do something about it, stop it. It was hurting the series. And he wouldn't listen again. I just got tired of him ignoring what I was saying. How many more times have I had to be proven right before he just acknowledged the fact that, I knew what was best for the series?
Yeah, because I know I was looking at everything and I'm like, well, this can't be a good thing, for the series. And there was actually people that actually left.
Yes.
There were people that were like, okay, I'm done with this in-house fighting.
I noticed. Yeah.
And hopefully, they realize, that storm's blown over and they come back and
when it was resolved, about a year later, then it was amazing how quickly the air cleared and how it got less toxic, and suddenly everything was okay again, and you could get on with it and you could concentrate on writing the series and promoting the series without this sort of black cloud hanging over you.
Yeah, it was it, and it's a continuation almost of Barry Sadler's life, but at the same time, this was his brainchild, his baby, and everything. Indeed. And it was like the drama still kind of continued,
Yeah, what would Barry have thought of the series with seeing that happen? What would he have done? He probably would have.
It's hard telling what he would have done. I'm sitting there like, we could speculate all day long. I don't think he would have put up with it. I think he would have said, no, we're not putting up with this nonsense. To pick up right where we left off, and this was kind of put a black eye on the series for a little while. Okay. And it was allegations of plagiarism. Right.
Yeah. I'll just skip forward to Casca 33, the other book written by the second author, which was a Western. And the reason why I think this other author got the job in the first place, because Gale wanted a Western, always wanted a Western in the Casca series. Yeah, it's a valid point, quite sensible, because the Old West is part of American history. And of course, Casca is a very heavily influenced American series. And I was sort of like a bit reluctant to do a Western because it's not my area of expertise and it's not something I know a lot about. And again, I didn't want to make a mess of things, being British and not being American and making a mess of American history. The Civil War, I was very careful with and was over careful, which is why the books didn't come across maybe as well as they could have done. And, if I could go back and write them better now. And I know what I'm doing. I felt more comfortable writing British or European history, to be quite honest. I was very reluctant to write American history because I felt as though I might make a mess of things. Because I know how proud Americans are of their own history. Last thing I wanted to do was to sort of like tread on people's history, really.
Right.
So the Westerns, I thought, I'm very reluctant. And Gale, decided that in that case, then he would get somebody else to write a Western. And he got his wish with the other writer doing The Outlaw. And after that was done, the accusations of plagiarism reared their heads.
Yeah, and I'll explain my part in this, because I have a bad habit sometimes of inadvertently throwing fuel on the fire without even realizing it, right? So to make it fair, I remember I had read Immortal Dragon, okay?
Yes.
And every once in a while, I'll go back and I'll reread a Casca story. And I think this was probably like, well, what, 2-3 years later, I went ahead and reread a little bit into Immortal Dragon. And I was sitting there reading that first chapter, and I was like, that sounds very familiar. It sounds almost like Rambo. Okay. But yeah. I ruled out First Blood, and I ruled out the second one. Well, I couldn't find my third Rambo book.
Right.
By David Morrell. Okay.
David Morrell, yeah.
I inadvertently, I intentionally, I said, I shot an email off to James Nolet.
Yes.
I said, this actually sounds like a Rambo book. It really does. It really sounds close, I said, wouldn't it be weird if it was plagiarism or something like that?
Yeah.
And knowing James, and we both know him, he actually had a copy of Rambo 3, and right away, he said, this has been plagiarized. And he pinpointed everything in Immortal Dragon and the connection with David Morrell's Rambo 3.
I remember exchanging emails with Dave Morrell. He was incandescent.
Yeah, he was
used a lot of choice words.
Yeah, he was very upset. I can imagine, and James got a hold of David Morrell too.
Yeah.
And on Facebook, and I said, well, he's not very technical savvy. Okay. No. So he got on Facebook, and it's kind of stirred the pot a little more because he posted it right to his page. And I said, shoot a private message. Shoot a private message. I tried to, because you don't want to air out people's dirty laundry, So
no, it's not the way to do it, really, is it? You do it quietly.
I've got screenshots of it.
All right.
So I was like, what is he doing? I was like, I tried to explain to him, okay, there's a thing on the page that says message. You click on that and it try to keep it private.
James is like a dog with a bone. Once he gets hold of something that he can get his teeth into, he won't let go.
No. And even when he's writing his books, once he comes up with an idea, he's writing that book.
Oh God, yeah.
And he won't stop until it's finished. So yeah. in this particular
he's a very determined man. He is
very, very, and of course there was a little bit of bad blood between them anyway.
Going back to our last thingy, what we were talking about, James Nolet being my proofreader, he also became the proofreader for the other writer, and pointed out a few, things to correct. And unfortunately, unlike myself, this other writer didn't take kindly to any corrections in his book. And there was a holy row between James and this other writer as to the reasons why the corrections should be made. And, it got actually quite insulting between the two of them. And James in the end just said, right, I'm not doing your books, and that was it then. James was anti this fella. And when the plagiarism thing came up, James thought, yeah, karma, I'm getting him. That's basically what happened.
Right. So, yeah, inadvertent, like I said, I kind of kicked the ball downfield and it hit a few heads, obviously.
Yeah.
And I just remember watching all the comments, you know, once all this flared to life, I was like, well, this is wild, you know. And then James got to looking into Outlaw and found out where that source came from, and it was
Andrew Fenedy.
Yeah,
Andrew Fenedy's book, wasn't it?
The Trespassers. You know, and I remember reading Outlaw, and I thought, well, that's kind of weird. It's like a totally different style than Immortal Dragon. Immortal Dragon was loaded with action and
yeah. Well, James sent me screenshots of the pages that are plagiarized, and they were word for word. The only thing that was changed were the character names.
Yeah,
it was absolutely word for word, and I just thought, oh dear.
Yeah.
And then of course got Gale in all the action, saying, look, Gale, you're going to get sued here, especially Dave Morrell gets you. He's going to rip your pants off. You know, that was it. Taken down.
Right. Did he get like a cease and desist letter?
I think it was heading that way.
Okay. Yeah.
Morrell's agent got on to Gale, and that was it. That was the end of it. Finished.
And Gale Riley just ordered like a box of Outlaw, didn't he?
He did. Yeah. He just ordered the box. So he lost out on that. You know, again, I didn't say to Gale, you know, you should have listened to me, but I just. Yeah.
Yeah. So those two books, and this is the reason why you can't get Immortal Dragon or Outlaw.
No.
You know, I don't want to speak for the other author, you know, because there's really no point in it. But, and there's no point in bashing or anything.
It's done and dusted. You know, he was in the Casca project. Now he's out, and you know, Gale didn't want to continue with his contract, and you know, had the books taken down because of, you know, the damages that would be caused. You know, the Casca project didn't want that, didn't need it, and so it was dropped very quickly.
And then, not to mention that he had plans to publish another Casca story, and that particular one was, I think, Terry McCarthy. Am I correct?
I think so. Yeah, Terry McCarthy. Yeah, that's right. It was the El Cid era story stolen from Hannibal.
Right, Terry McCarthy's Hannibal. You know, yeah, there was a lot of big name authors involved. I mean, you had David Morrell, and you had Andrew Fenedy, and then Terry McCarthy. And there, unfortunately, you know, the other author also left a bad taste with the Outlander Deathland forums, and there was some animosity there from years back. You know.
Well, yeah, I was in correspondence with one of the authors of the Outlander series, an English fellow called Rick Hoskin, who's gone on to, you know, other things now. But he was saying that a lot of his books were attacked very unreasonably so by this other author's friends, and indeed the other author. You know, which was
that carried over on the forums.
Yeah, and it spilled over.
Yeah, it spilled over into the Casca series.
And you didn't want that. Well, what's all this about?
And not to mention, you know, there was his followers were leaving bad reviews on a lot of other people's books.
Yeah,
I remember
was like
there
was
one. Huh?
It was like a cancer spreading. You know,
it was
rid of it.
Right. Yeah, it was bad. And I remember there was one guy. He was an independent published author too, and he had left like a 3-star or something like that on one of the other Casca writers' books.
Okay.
And it was like that guy got an avalanche of bad reviews on his books. It was just like, and it was just because they felt like he was attacking this favorite author, Casca author, and it was like he left a 3-star, and he left a constructive review. You know, nothing. I didn't see anything negative in it. but they had actually went and attacked his books, and it was like, holy cow.
This is the problem with people who are have a narcissistic personality. They cannot have any criticism at all whatsoever directed towards them, even if it's constructive. It's just no. First of all, they won't listen to it. They'll ignore it, but then they'll also attack it and make out the other person's in the wrong.
Right.
That's narcissism for you.
Right. So when it was all said and done, the Casca series has multiple black guys for all practical purposes.
In the middle of all this, I was still trying to write Casca, and the intention was for me to write one, the other writer to write one, me to write one, the other author to write one. So I'd written 28, the other author had written 29, I'd written 30, the other author was then meant to write 31. And, we had our schedules. So I was writing Conqueror, which was meant to be number 32, which I decided to sort of write about the Norman conquests of England, the Battle of Hastings, which is a very big incident in English and British history.
A good story.
And yeah. I mean, I thought of how to do it. Casca beginning recovering from an attack on his farm that he'd been living in France. Everybody was dead apart from him because he'd been killed, but he's come back to life because he's immortal, and he wants revenge. Good story again, isn't it? Revenge. That's what it's all about.
Right.
He finds out who the name of the person who led the group, so he follows them to Caen, which is in Normandy, just as the Norman army is gathering to invade England, conveniently enough. So, that's how he gets to it. He joins the Norman army, comes over to England, the Battle of Hastings, and he gets involved in all that sort of thing, and he's rewarded for his part in the battle, and he's given land to run. Now, it came too close to the publishing time of 31. The other writer was meant to be doing it. And lo and behold, he couldn't meet his deadline. So Gail rang me up. He said, could you get your book finished? I said, I've only got 2/3 of it done. He said, yeah, I want it done, 2 weeks. 2 weeks? So,
oh my God.
So I just went absolutely berserk on the keyboard. I wrote in 11 days, the last third of that book. I just went absolutely mad. Finished it, whacked it off to Greg, because the procedure was for me to finish the book, send the rough draft off to Greg so that he could read it, make up the artwork around the story, and then do the artwork, and then throw the rough draft away. And then I would get the draft proofread, edited, come back to me. I would then send it off to Gail for him to join up with the artwork and send it off for printing. So that was the way we worked. So I did that all within the deadline, within the 2-week deadline. Oh God, I was burnt out.
Right. Yeah, but it still turned out to be a pretty good story.
I was surprised at how well it did turn out. Just, considering the fact that the last bit was done in a tearing hurry, and also the fact that I was, depressed through all the stupidity that was going on at the time. I still managed to function. And also I was holding down a 9-to-5 job at the time as well.
Yeah.
It's like, how did I do that? So yeah, the Conqueror sort of came out and fitted into that time period of 1066 and 1067, and then ended, with the end of the fight between Casca and the bad guy. So, good way to end the book on that climactic fight. So I ended it there. And then I started number 32. And number 32 was one of the books that I decided to write as a sequel to an existing book in the Barry Sadler period. And the one thing that kept coming back to my mind was the end of the Trench Soldier, where he was on that ship going to Gallipoli. He'd been burned in a flamethrower attack. He'd been sunk on this ship, and he was sort of like drowned, burnt, God knows what. He was a hell of a mess, but he was still alive, because of the curse. So I thought, right, that's a good point to pick up the story and then have him go to Gallipoli. And knowing the First World War's history, that was really the Anzacs, the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. So he had to become an Anzac. So that's what the title of that book, number 32, was, the Anzac. And it's actually one of my favorite covers that Greg did for me.
Yeah.
He's that one.
Yeah.
I quite like it.
Yeah. And it was a good story too. I like that.
Yeah. It was a good story. Again, I very assiduously did some research on it and found out one or two little interesting points. There's a love interest, as you always do. I chuck a nurse who's treating Casca in on the story. The main plot, obviously, is him going to Gallipoli and fighting amongst the Australians against the Turks. But the B plot is when he's on the ship, he's recovering his wounds, and the orderly there who is tending him notices that there's something not quite right. And his curiosity gets the better of him, and then he becomes quite keen to find out the truth. That he pursues Casca all through the book, not realizing that he's actually helping the opposition, who in this case are the British police, to capture Casca, try and capture Casca. And this is the first book that I wrote that I had a friend of mine appear as a character in the book. One of the guys I worked with at the time was a guy called Richard Hiron, who a good friend of mine at work. He liked history like I did. He read the Casca books, and he wanted to be in it. So I wrote him in as Captain Hiron, who was at Gallipoli. And towards the end of the book, you see his character there. So he appears in it. So that's where I got him from. And the end of the book has Casca leaving Gallipoli and making his way to Bulgaria. Now, at the very end of this book, it's a bit of a poignant bit on the end of this book. He's in Thessalonica, in Salonika, in Greece, where the big British and French army was encamped for a couple of years, 1915, 1916. And this is 1915 now. No, 1916. And he's there, and it's a character he meets in a bar called Fred Vellender. Now, my partner, she's Jane Vellender, and during the war, the First World War, she had two relatives who were soldiers in the British Army. Both were killed in the First World War. One was killed on the Somme. He got wounded and was taken back to hospital and died on, I think, the 4th of July. And he was buried at a place called Albert, which we've actually been to his grave. It's quite sobering, really. Mm-hmm. The other one, Fred, was in Salonika, and he's with the Hampshire Regiment. And he went out one day on patrol in 1917. The Bulgarians got hold of him, and they never found his body. But his name is on a big war memorial north of Greece, near the Albanian border, overlooking a lake. We haven't been there, but it'd be nice to go there. But I thought I would include Fred Vellender in the story. He's only got a cameo role, but I did that to honour one of my partner's relatives. So yeah, he just talks to him a couple of lines in this tavern, but that's he was a real person.
I'll be darned. Well, that's always interesting to find out these little tidbits of information in these stories,
Yeah.
And I'm sure
nice
Barry,
putting them in.
Yeah, I'm sure Barry Sadler had his own little, personal friends and stories interwoven in his. Without a doubt. Yeah. So, yeah, I like the Anzac, and for anybody that's interested in these books, with the exception of Immortal Dragon and Outlaw, which you can't get a hold of, and the books we're going into now are Tony Roberts' books, and they're available at Casca.net. So, but Anzac is a good story. I like that one. And then after that one,
well, after that was the Outlaw, and then we had all the fuss about the plagiarism rear its head, and
right.
I just kept my head down. Then I just thought, no, I'm not getting involved in all this sort of mess.
Right.
It doesn't do me any good.
No. And then, but what was the one after that one? Yep, Devil's Horseman. See, that's another cover that was pretty decent too.
Yes, yes. Greg did a good job with this one.
The only thing I didn't like was that pixelated Casca. That's the only.
Right.
That was. It was just pretty bad. But
well,
the artwork itself is good.
What Greg did was actually get a real face of Barry Sadler and include it. That's why it's like that. That is again a pixelated Barry Sadler face, because Gale wanted Barry Sadler's face on all the covers.
Yeah, I was just saying the Casca, the words Casca, that they're pretty.
Oh yeah, yes, they are a little bit blurred. Yeah.
Yeah, but the artwork is pretty good on that one.
Yeah, it's excellent, and I sort of like wanted to go back to the Mongol horde, because there's this great story of them sweeping through Eastern Europe in 1241, and they attack Poland, wipe out the Polish army, and a few days later a second branch goes into Hungary and wipes out the Hungarian army. You're thinking, good God, what happened there? And so I sort of read the history of that, and there's a fascinating feat where in Krakow in Poland, even to this day, every hour there's a member of the Krakow Fire Brigade who goes up into St. Mary's Church, which was there at the time of 1241 when this Mongol horde attacked Krakow. And he saw the Mongol horde coming over the plains towards the city. So he wanted to raise the alarm. So he got his bugle to his lips and started trumpeting the alarm. And partway through, a Mongol archer just shot him through the throat. And what happens every hour at St. Mary's, this trumpeter from the fire brigade plays that alarm and cuts off at the point where the man was shot through the throat.
Oh. You see, and this is another thing too that's interesting about your books. You do your research. I mean, you really thoroughly do your research. Not only read the history behind it, but in some cases you actually go visit these battlefields.
Yeah.
You actually talk with maybe even reenactors, like
yes.
Like you did with Johnny Reb and Confederate. You actually talked to.
Yeah, I worked with one, and also I actually met one, because there's where I live is Bristol, in the west of England, and just 10, 11 miles away is the city of Bath, which is famous for Jane Austen and the Roman baths and that sort of thing. But also there is the American Museum. There's on the hills above Bath. It's a beautiful setting. There's the American Museum, where it has tapestries in there, and it has a history of America. They have setups of log cabins and things like that. And on the grounds outside, they have a bust of Winston Churchill, Abraham Lincoln, and so forth. But every October, they have a reenactment between the Confederates and the Union, and a battle. So we went there one October, and Chambers had a camera there, and she was taking photographs. And somebody thought that she was an official photographer. So they let us in right next to where the battle was. We wouldn't stand back with all the crowd. We were actually let in right by the fence next to the battle. So she has some superb shots of this battle. So I've got them, and I occasionally use them. In fact, I think I sent you.
You did. Yeah, that was part of the test when I took over as a cover artist.
Yeah, I sent you some pictures of the battle that we actually photographed. And I then interviewed some fella who was meant to be a corporal in the Alabamian. Is that how you pronounce it? Or was it Alabamian? How do you pronounce it?
What, here in Alabama? Yeah,
Alabamian, is it?
No, no, you just say Alabama, native of Alabama.
All right, an Alabama corporal. He was showing me how to load the mini rifle. So he was doing it there right in front of me. So I was sort of taking notes, and then fired, and all the smell. And I thought, So I included that in the Confederate, because I was writing the Confederate at the time. So yes, I got it all there. So yeah, I know how to. It's loaded, the loading sequence, the smell of the discharge of the gunpowder. So yeah, I take that kind of approach to finding out about the things. And in Devil's Horseman, this is why I introduce a new character to do the sounding for Casca's stories. And what we haven't actually touched on after the first book was, every so often Casca goes back to Julius Goldman and tells the story. So what you're reading in the Casca books is actually what he's telling Julius Goldman. And Julius used to share stories of Bob Landry's. And as time's gone on, you know, these people are getting older. And of course, I think it was in The Avenger, I think it was, I had Bob Landry's die and his funeral. And his son, Danny, I invented. It hadn't appeared in a Barry Sadler book, but I created this character called Danny Landry's, who was Bob Landry's son. And he knew Julius Goldman. And he's introduced to Casca. And he becomes involved with being the new sounding board for the Casca stories, because Dr. Goldman is getting old now, so he's not able to travel so far. So here in this beginning of this book, they're in Krakow, and they're looking at that St. Mary's Church where the bugler cuts off his trumpet, and Danny's there. So that's the first, I think, book that I actually got Danny as the sounding board for the Casca stories.
Yeah, because obviously some of the characters, the original characters like Landry's, they're getting a little too old anyway. You know, if you stick with the timeline and everything, you're going to have to create a new generation of people,
absolutely,
to come in and take over for Landry's. So
because Casca started in 1970, the original scene. So you know, you come to 2003, which is when the prologue, or the first chapter of this book is meant to take place. So that's, you know, 33 years on from the events of the beginning of Eternal Mercenary. And, you know, Bob Landry is older than Julius Goldman. We sort of like hazarded a guess that Julius Goldman would have been about 30, 32 at that time. So Bob would have been 40, 43. So another 33 years on from that, you know, we had him die, you know, around about 2000, because, you know, he got to an age where his infirmities got the better of him. And I think Barry Sadler alluded that Bob Landry wasn't in the best of health anyway in one of the books that he appeared in. And he sort of bemoaned the fact that he wasn't keeping up with exercise and that sort of thing. So I thought I'll take that on. But, you know, Julius Goldman still around, even on The Red Rose. He does appear, actually. That's a bit of a giveaway. The latest book, Julius Goldman does appear. He's still alive, so I haven't killed him off yet.
Well, let's hope they stick around for a little bit.
A bit longer. Yeah, so Devil's Horseman covers that Mongol invasion of Eastern Europe, about 1236 to 1242. And then I have him riding off again into the sunset. It seems to be quite a regular thing, really. There you go. But that was the first book I wrote after the nonsense with the other writer had finished, and I actually felt better. So I actually enjoyed writing this book. I really did. I flowed through it, and it was a really good story. And I think it shows in the way I wrote it, to be quite honest.
It does. Yeah, there was a lot more enthusiasm in that. Yeah. And then after Devil's Horseman. Now a very interesting book. You talk about the row between the two writers dividing fans. My next book divided fans quite a bit. Sword of the Brotherhood. Okay. Why did that divide people?
It was a little bit explicit, shall we say. There were quite a few sexually explicit scenes in this one, and I think it put some people off. The Sword of the Brotherhood actually was a very important book for me, story-wise, as far as the Casca timeline is concerned. I'd had this book in mind for quite a long time, 15 years, I think it was. And what I wanted to do was to plant the spear of Longinus in that church in Antioch, which would be found on the First Crusade, because you know the story of the First Crusade. They're attracting Antioch. The Turks are surrounding them. The Crusaders are sort of on a hiding to nothing, and they find the Holy Lance underneath the floor of this church. You know, and being with the Casca story, the lance is the holy spear of the Brotherhood. And I'm thinking to myself, how did that get there? How can I weave it into the Casca story? I've got to put it there. And the only person who could put it there would be Casca.
Right.
So I created this story, Sword of the Brotherhood, purely for that one thing, is to put that spear under that church's floor.
And this lance is supposedly what was used by Casca to pierce the side of Christ.
Jesus. Yeah.
So.
And that's why the Brotherhood hold it as a holy of the holies. That's their talisman. They're sort of like their icon, basically. You know, no is touch it, it's pure. And at the beginning of the Sword of the Brotherhood, it takes place in the 7th century. The Byzantine Empire has been attacked by the Persians, and they've lost a lot of land, including Jerusalem, which is where I had the Brotherhood of the Lamb being based. And the Persians took the Holy Lance, and this happened in reality, in history. They took the relics of the true cross and the Holy Lance with them back to Ctesiphon when they captured Jerusalem. That actually happened. And Heraclius, who was the Byzantine emperor at the time, waged a war to try and defeat the Persians in getting this back from them. So what happened, I had was Casca captured by the Brotherhood of the Lamb at the very beginning of the book, along with his woman, Aisha. And Casca is forced to join the Brotherhood of the Lamb. Now, I thought that was a hell of a sort of a twist. So that's why he is the sword of the Brotherhood, you see.
Right.
And he is forced to go with the Byzantine army to go to Ctesiphon to retake the Holy Lance for the Brotherhood and bring it back to the Brotherhood, and they will then, you know, return Aisha to him. However, the Brotherhood, being the twisted sect that they are, they brainwash Aisha whilst Casca is away with the army to make her join them, and they use sex as a kind of inducement to her. You know, they sort of like get her to sort of feel ecstasy, and she becomes brainwashed and becomes a completely different person. And I think some people were put off by some of the scenes in that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, understandably. I know a couple of people didn't want to buy them anymore after that. You know, and it's sort of a hazard, I suppose, of writing things like that. And I must admit, after that, I toned it back a bit. I thought, no, okay, people don't want that. Okay, fine. You know, again, it's listening to people in any way that I can. You know, if people had said, look, I don't like that too much, too explicit, I thought, okay, fine. You know, rather than just say I'm not buying any more. And the war with Heraclius ends in 628 with the defeat of the Persians and the return of the spear. Now, what I did was Casca has the spear, but he swaps it. He switches it, puts the real one under the floor of the church of St. Peter's in Antioch, and returns a fake one to the Brotherhood. And there's a final scene where he's in the Brotherhood's sort of underground sanctuary, where he realizes he's been double-crossed as well. He's double-crossed them, but he's also been double-crossed. And he goes on a rampage, and he just slaughters his way through ranks of Brotherhood people. And I got that scene in my mind from a film called V for Vendetta. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I haven't seen it personally, no. But I've seen all the references to it over the years. There's a scene where the main character V is in an underground railway station, and he just goes on the rampage and cuts his way through all the bad guys, the secret police, towards the main bad guy. Yeah, and I had that in mind, but I thought this scene calls for something like that. So Casca has this sword, and he just goes absolutely berserk. You know, he's wounded twice, but he's so angry, and he's got adrenaline flowing through him. He just butchers his way through these ranks of Brotherhood people, you know, which I quite enjoyed writing. That was a good story.
Yeah, and he finally sinks because of his wounds. He loses consciousness, but he sinks down and he's laughing because he knows he's double crossed them as well. You know, you can't get away with it forever. You know, I've double crossed you too. You know, they don't realise it. And that's the last scene before he blacks out. So you know that's an interesting story. But that whole book was purely to put that one thing in the church floor of Antioch, so that when I wrote the Crusader later on, I could then come to that point.
Right.
So I was thinking ahead a couple of years, you know.
Right. And the lance comes back in a later story, but we'll touch on that.
Oh,
but
yeah.
After the Brotherhood, what was that?
After the Brotherhood came a story which I felt I had to write, and it was a very interesting one because I'm British. I was writing for an American audience. You know which book I'm talking about, don't you?
Yes. Yep, the Minuteman.
The American War of Independence, or the, what do you guys call it? The Revolutionary War, don't you?
Yeah, Revolutionary War. Yeah.
Yeah. What we'll do, we'll talk about this and onwards next time out, because we're running out of time again. I can see, and my voice is starting to go again.
I kind of noticed that. I was like, but you know, if you want, you can pitch for Casca.net. You know, hold up some Casca books or something like that. Then I can edit that in there.
Yeah, by all means. Hang on, my latest book.
Right there, you go. Casca.net. If you want your copy of Red Rose, The Minuteman, or anything else Tony Roberts has written in the Casca series. Casca.net.
Yes. So yeah, we'll pick up on that when we have our next chat.
Yeah, it'll probably be next week. So,
yeah, that's fine. Well, you've got some editing to do, haven't you, to publish?
Oh, I got tons of editing. I've got tons. You know, this episode, I'm probably going to put the two videos together. It's probably going to be maybe just under an hour. Okay.
All right. Yeah.
You know, so, and I still think people will pay attention to it.
Hopefully.
Yeah, they will.
Yeah, I've had a lot of comments from people who are already about the ones we've published already, who are very fascinated by the backstories behind the books and the series.
Right. So at this, like I said, I'll edit this. I'll try and edit it today and put it together. The ones we did yesterday, I'm going to have to probably cut that in half, and we'll make 2 episodes out of that. But what we